Well, first of all, I think this accession fatigue predates the crisis. So, and actually, if I were to point to characterize the region prior to the crisis, the fiscal issue was not on top of the list. I mean, it was in a few countries, but that was not the main. So I think accession fatigue has other roots mostly. It may now take sometimes the expression of complaining about large fiscal deficits. I was at the 10th anniversary of the euro, and there were discussions about trying to introduce new criteria based on the quality of the financial systems in the applicant countries. I think these are the kind of things that create uncertainty about the accession path. And of course, for some countries, accession is very far away, and it doesn't affect so much decisions today. But for some countries, these are very immediate. I just come back from discussions about the Baltics and in the Nordic countries, and for the Baltics, this is a very real option to quickly come in. They have to take very difficult decisions in the short term, but this is probably the way out for them. So when we introduce new criteria or discussions about should they be in or left out, even if they meet the criteria, we need to provide strong signals that if you meet these criteria, you are let in, and I think that's the main message.
Yes, please.
Andra Timur from Romanian Money Channel. I want to refer to Romania as a study case. Recently, a National Institute of Statistics figures showed have shown a decrease in GDP year on year in the first 3 months from this year of 6.4%. Also, the current account deficit has shrunk 82% also in the same period, and the foreign direct investment have decreased over 13%. How do you see the situation, and what measures do you believe it would be appropriate for the government and also National Bank to take given this scenario?
Yes, I am familiar with these numbers, and of course, it's not a comfort, but it's unfortunately the kind of numbers that we've seen in many countries. I think what's helpful is the fact that there now is a program with the IMF and the European Union, which is, I think, creates stability particularly around the financial system. We have worked very closely with the IMF on this program, and particularly, one aspect of the current crisis is that it's a private sector crisis, and of course the IMF was not set up to deal with the private sector as much. So I think we have had an important role in getting commitment from the financial sector to stay involved in Romania. I think that is very important for dealing with this issue, getting capital out into the real economy, making sure that adjustments that now will take place in terms of the leverage in the banking system and responses to drops in demand happen in an orderly way, and I think in Romania that is particularly important.
Phil Thornton from Emerging Markets. I was wondering if I could ask you to elaborate on your point about the public sector crisis, whether that's sort of a next leg in the crisis. Have you looked at sort of which countries are most likely to be affected? And do you think that the policies being run by the IMF and others are the right ones?
Well, we know from experience that from this kind of financial crisis, one of the main casualties is the fiscal balance, and it comes primarily from the drop in revenues. So the cost of the bank bailouts as such usually has not been the major issue. The main cost is on the drop in revenues, and we see that in some very dramatic ways in our region. If you look at Ukraine, for example, it is quite dramatic. It comes from essentially two sources. One is that Ukraine in a very short time has gone from having a very large current account deficit to now being in a surplus in its current account, meaning that they lost a lot of revenues. Well, this adjustment came through a very dramatic cut in imports, and a substantial source of revenue was import tariffs. So that was, but you also then had a fall in tax revenues from lower growth. So there are some countries that are more affected than others, and some countries that maybe don't have so much buffers in terms of dealing with this. Having said that, I think the region as a whole came into this crisis, and I said that before, in a relatively healthy fiscal state, and they had done a lot to get out of maybe some bad behaviors from previous periods, but they entered this very strong, mostly strong fiscal stance. And what we worry about is that they will come out of this with a much weaker fiscal stance, and if this is not addressed, this will be somehow the seeds of a future crisis. But I think as long as we are attentive to this, as long as we for the countries that are most immediately affected, we find ways of filling those fiscal gaps, I think we will be fine.
Yes, please.
Should the ECB do more right now to stabilize the situation in the CE countries, especially for the non-euro members and also for non-EU countries?
So the short answer is yes, but I think saying that, I think one thing we should remember is that the ECB is doing a lot at the moment in terms of supporting the Western European banks. And I mean a lot, because without the ECB, providing liquidity right now, we would be in a very different world. So that's the good thing. What is probably where we would like to see more action. I think there are some encouraging signs, but maybe the movement is not as quick as some of us would have liked. But in terms of doing the kind of things that they have done to support some non-euro members, like Denmark, for example, in the past, but in providing swap lines in local currency. I think also the repo facilities, getting to technicalities here, but they have provided this to Hungary and Poland. I think they could go further and do similar things like what they have done in a country like Denmark. We understand that this is this is not something you can do across the board. You have to look at each specific case, and I think there are some very good candidates, as you probably know. There have been some approaches from those likely candidates, and we certainly would like to see that approach being positively received.
Joe.
Hi, Joe Parkinson, Dow Jones Newswise. Following on from that then, do you think it's the wrong idea from the ECB to not accept Central and East European currency collateral securities as part of its liquidity window? What's your reaction to that?
Well, I'm less certain about. I think I think the ECB should move in that direction. What I was